the main thing is, like, this will be, like, there'll be people talking about, like, cancel culture is dead, and I'll be like, you're going to miss it while it's gone. Like, your entire thing was built upon it, and without it, you kind of don't really have a reason to exist. This is a good one. I'm Jesse David Fox, senior writer at Vulture and author of Comedy Book. Earlier this week, Louis C.K. released a special on Netflix called Ridiculous. This is his fourth special since 2017, when the New York Times reported accusations of the comedian's sexual misconduct, but is only the first on a major platform. As a result, depending on who you are and what internet you've been on the last decade, him releasing this special now on that streaming service is either shocking or mundane, infuriating or gratifying. So what exactly is a person supposed to think of this information? And more simply, is this special worth watching? To discuss these questions and so much more, my guest this week is Vulture critic Kathryn VanArendonk. Despite his other releases, this special coming out now feels like a big deal. It must be reckoned with, and I cannot think of a better person to do so with than Kathryn. So, here is Kathryn VanArendonk. I'm here with Kathryn VanArendonk. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. We're going to be talking about Louis C.K.'s Ridiculous that was released on Netflix.com. Before we get too far into it, what are your just sort of first reactions? How would you describe what this special is?
This special is the first major special by a comedian who used to be the most famous and important stand-up comedian alive, and was also one of the most notorious cancel culture figures. And this special is now the most mainstream return for him. And I found it impossible to watch without thinking about all of those things at the same time. And I don't think that works to the special's benefit.
No, how could it? I would say, like, for me, there is one section that I would say is exceptional. It's very, very, very good. And then it is otherwise just sort of like lackluster to a point of like kind of being monotonous. But it definitely seems like, having rewatched his previous 3 specials that were released on his own website, a clear attempt to just sort of like Men in Black mind erase and be like, 2016, this is kind of what you remembered what I was doing. Don't really look at what I was doing in the years in between. And it's interesting what that means for a person like Louis C.K., but it definitely felt calculated, unsurprisingly, because for better or worse, he's very talented. So it is, and we'll see, it might work. But that was sort of the main thing. I was like, oh, he knows the buttons that would make it so that would be the story, where other comedians, I think, would be a lot sloppier with it. But as a result, it is, like, other than the one part, I think, a quite boring experience.
It's boring, but it is also, I found it to be this baffling experience of like a funhouse mirror thing, where I was constantly having a reaction based on not just the story about him, but based on the material. Yeah. I was now constantly having a reaction that he both wanted and very much did not want me to have at the same time. And so I spent my entire time watching the special feeling like the joke had the response that he wanted it to, and also it was exactly opposite from what he was attempting to create.
Yeah, I think what will be interesting for the special is people will be entering it with a lot of different contexts. Yeah. Right? Like, he's been a huge stand-up comedian, especially for the last 5 years of this, like playing Madison Square Garden, arguably playing venues the same size he was playing beforehand. And to those people, yeah, it's another special from Louis C.K. I'm just watching it somewhere else. Oh, so great. I don't have to pay for it.
Yes, it's on Netflix now.
And other people, he like vanished, and then they're watching this. And I think as a result, it'll be useful to sort of like recontextualize it. Also because it's essentially 10 years, and there will be people who like either don't remember because they're not following this closely, or were too young really to understand what it was.
100%.
So I think a nice place a good place to start would be, can you convey to people who don't remember this how big of a deal Louis C.K. was in 2016?
Yes. He was truly the only stand-up comedian that you could be sure that every single person had heard of.
Yes.
He was incredibly famous in a bunch of different. He was incredibly famous and also good.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those things where it was like, all comedians know that he's incredibly good at his job. He is operating at the top of his craft. And the vast public has also agreed that he is good and famous and popular and important. It is like these things almost never intersect, and had for him. And he was operating in a real prestige space because he had this TV show that was like artsy and playing with the form. This was Louis on FX. And so you got a lot of TV critics and people, sort of film kinds of people being like, oh, it's so inventive and innovative, and it's in using film language to do television and all the things that make me crazy. And also he would then go on talk shows and do a little bit, not even sitting on a couch, do a joke about what it is like to be in an airplane and how we should all be grateful for being in an airplane. And it would go mega, mega, mega viral. And like you couldn't have existed online without having seen him do that joke. Not even heard about it. Like you sat and watched the whole clip. And so when the Me Too movement kicked off, there was a pretty swift undercurrent of like, are we gonna get to Louis C.K.? Is that gonna happen among anyone who sort of followed comedy rumors?
Yeah.
This was a well-known secret, exactly the kind of thing that the Me Too movement was so fervent about exposing and no longer just putting up with. And his was also one of the first major sort of like, okay, this thing is a movement.
Yeah.
This is not just one isolated story. This is a thing that we are going to see happen to people. Your most famous, beloved figures could be actual secret monsters.
Yeah.
And so there was a New York Times story that came out in 2017, which accused him of sexual misconduct, in particular of masturbating in front of people. In front of women, in front of female comedians, usually. And there were both the accusations that were in that story, and then there was also quite a lot of sort of other rumors and social media posts about other people who had not been in the story. And there was a huge fallout from it. He acknowledged, but did not apologize.
He didn't say the words "I'm sorry."
Yes,
for legal reasons. This is where you're,
and also for whatever.
Yeah,
all
who knows
reasons.
other words? But from what I've learned since, is if you say "I'm sorry," then it is you're legally more liable than if you sort of say whatever he said. It was in compared to the sort of apologies that happened since. It is longer and more thorough. But some people were like, okay, that's enough of an apology for me. I didn't really care that much. Some people were like, he didn't say sorry, and that's sort of like that split was sort of a fission, and then. I guess part of the story is also then like 7 months later, or whatever months later, he came back, and there was a lot of debate of when he should come back. His set was leaked, and there was like jokes about a school shooting. I honestly can't remember because there's been other school shootings since. And I think it's useful to talk about the fallout in terms of like its relationship to like the state of comedy. Because as you said, it was this weird moment where everyone agreed that he was the greatest comedian working. Like we now think of comedy as tribalized, but those tribes used to both sort of agree on Louis C.K. And Louis like very deliberately like picked from different groups and was very good at sort of navigating that. He always would seem still edgy enough for sort of the edgier people and still sort of emotional and thoughtful for the people who preferred that. And then I think part of it, and the sort of mythos that he became sort of avatar of taking comedy seriously, and the idea of comedy as the modern day philosopher and comedy as the sort of definitive truth teller.
Yeah.
This idea of like the comedy of truth teller is like an extremely recent phenomenon and really centered on Louis. And it's unbelievable, if you don't know this, to look back of how people talked about Louis for those the first sort of 10, 15 years of the 21st century. And like truly the profile in the New Yorker of him was like TV's most honest man. It was always going back to how like honest he was. And this idea that he was sort of bearing his soul always with his comedy. And then you were like, wait, this whole time he was lying to us? He was doing these jokes about masturbating all the time, but he was sort of lying to us.
But telling the truth.
But telling the truth, right? So then it made me rethink about like what truth means in comedy. And I think it then sort of like broke open just sort of like what it means, what we're doing. And can you talk about then the sort of fallout of losing Louis C.K. as this sort of figure?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to piece apart what is correlation and what is causation because there's a lot of things that were happening at the same moment. This was also the moment when we all started, when social video is sort of nascent and then beginning to take off, when like comedy podcasts become the major forum for like hanging out with your comedy friends, and then everyone gets kind of nicheified into them. Algorithmic video, like all of these other things are also causing this. But there is this other Louis C.K. element to it where the material that you do now is associated with you. Like you are, everything you say then becomes more deliberately a signal to the kind of audience that you want, or it is like a thing that you can be indicted for. Like any moment that we had where the way that you told the story and the art of doing it, and this was kind of the thing that we valued in a comedian's craft, was then understandably washed away in this sense of like, what did you actually say? What kind of jokes are you telling? Who are you telling me that you are? And so the particularly the alt-right edginess guys figured out quite quickly that you could stand on a stage and get that crowd to associate you with a certain kind of identity tribalism by signaling, saying what kinds of specific words and using accents and all the things that you understand. Likewise, there was this, rise of many of them women who had been, some of them women who had been abused by or harassed by Louis C.K. Voices being like, we are also an important group of, and then it was like, are you on that side? Are you on this side? And you lose that central sense of like, this is the guy who is deciding like what truth looks like.
And the truth is, Louis was never as truthful as the media, and not even like, it's so funny to be like, he was honest about the fact that he was not honest. Actually, oddly amount, he would often do jokes where he would say premises were lies. There's a famous clip, at least to me, where he's talking funny or whatever, which is the special that HBO did, where it's Louis C.K., Chris Rock, Jerry Seinfeld, and Ricky Gervais. It's
a group.
It's mostly a special about how Ricky Gervais thinks he's as good of a comedian as the other three. But there's a moment where like Ricky is almost like insulting Jerry. He's like, you do jokes, but like Louis doesn't even do jokes. He's just like up there bearing his soul. And Louis like, no, I'm doing jokes. I just like hide it. And the thing is like Louis was not actually just a truth teller. Like definitely the thing that got him the most respect was he did jokes about the early phase of parenting with a sort of like rawness and frankness and just sort of like willing to like be in the muck about it that just had not really been done before and has really taken hold since.
And you couldn't have done as a woman.
Yeah, and definitely, and I think he gets extra credit because it's a man.
100%.
You could do it, just people wouldn't like it as much.
And they would have been like, "You're a mom, and we don't want to listen to you talking about how much you resent your children."
Yeah, 100%. No, now it happens more now. There's a little bit more freedom to it.
Yes, but the only reason that freedom exists for somebody like Ali Wong is because Louis C.K. was already out.
And so that was really that completely changed his career trajectory. No one really liked his stand-up because like most of his stand-up was sort of like absurd fake interactions with people. Then he does this thing, he creates a real connection with the audience. He's seen as this sort of like rare, honest comedian. And then he sort of mixes in. And what I realize is there's really like 5 Louis C.K.s. And I think a lot of great comedians have to be a bunch of different comedians because you have to like essentially assemble cohorts. So like he never lost the absurdist person who has fake interactions with people. There is somewhere the part of him who like is, I think, like wants to be honest about life. And also I think there is this sort of like mixing that as like an existential like desire to look at like the dark parts of existence. So that's sort of one part. But then there's also the like edgelord who kind of gets away with it.
Yeah.
Look how cleverly I get away with it. That like he has a joke about why it's okay to say the N-word. That I think that style of comedy has really taken a hold, even though it's been 20 years since he's done that.
Yeah,
And
although
then
they lost the cleverness part.
Yeah, and they didn't need it. They were just like, oh, actually,
yeah,
people
yeah.
didn't need the first part where he justified. And then there's like what you would call like the shame monster, or what I call it, which is like a person just talking about how disgusting they are. And you think he's being confessional. That word was thrown around a lot with Louis, that he's being confessional, when he's actually essentially being an exhibitionist.
Yeah.
And so then what is useful is, okay, so those are 5 things. One of the things I think was like probably the most respected part, most revolutionary part, most interesting part. Then you have these other 4 parts. He gets canceled, gets Me Too'd, but doesn't really stop performing and releases more stand-up specials. And he kind of just like switches the amount of which part of himself that he's showcasing. Gone is the sort of like personal stuff at all. There's still some absurdist, but it's a lot of the edgelord person who can get away with it. And I think that's partly a reflection of the fact of like, that's who his audience is. That's a large audience. And it's like, if lesser comedians are doing a worse version of it, he can do like, he can kind of also do it. And it's really, those specials are bad or much worse than all of his other output because it is so much of that stuff. There's probably one great joke, I think, in the entirety of that. He has a joke about COVID and how people would say it's like a 9/11 every day. And he's like, when do we start comparing things to 9/11s? Honestly, it was one of the best jokes written about COVID and just sort of like looking at death and the fact of how casual we became with it. But it was a lot more of the edgy stuff. And then slowly, the sort of like gross stuff was coming back. Like he didn't do the first special because clearly he probably even knew his fans didn't want it, but the gross stuff came back. And instead of personal, there's a lot of like victim, like, oh, like isn't it crazy? Like, can you imagine what it'd be like to have your life blown up? Like really centers himself. And as we then go into this special, it definitely is like trying to rejigger it a little bit because it's going to be on Netflix. And hopefully people don't realize like, oh, he's like doing kind of like a lot of race related jokes. He's doing a lot of jokes to try to get away with doing accents. There's a little bit of that here, but
just a skosh.
But there is like kind of more of a personal part. There is like a lot of just sort of like observational comedy that feels like just lulls you into being like, oh, this is normal. But there is also sort of the other stuff. And it's really a test of like, can I put this in here and see if people are going to be fine with it?
Yeah.
Talking about the special, I think like it would be useful, if it's okay, to talk about the good part first.
Sure.
Because people are going to be like, you hate him, you think he sucks. And I think it'd be really useful to talk about how there's one part that I think is great. And it's honestly like, even if you look at the specials before Me Too, he was doing less of this stuff anyway. He seemed like had less personal stuff he wanted to talk about. And you're getting famous and rich and your personal life is not interesting.
Right.
So there's a section here about his putting his dad in a home.
Yes.
And you talk about that section.
Yes. So this section starts, he gets into it a little bit, but it starts about 15 minutes in. And he introduces it in ways that are not they're not trying to telegraph that this is the exciting part of this. This is the interesting part of this special. He starts talking about his mom, which he gets into with a joke to do with vagina. I mean, there's just,
Yeah.
But what he gets up to is that he doesn't miss his dad. Why doesn't he miss his dad? Because his dad is still alive, but he does not see his dad. Why doesn't he see his dad? Because he's in a home. Why did they put his dad in a home? Because he was too old to stop them.
Yes. And they didn't want to look at him, and it's illegal to kill him.
And it's illegal to kill him.
Which is a funny thing to say.
Yes. And there are several lines in that, what becomes an extended joke about his father in a home. Many lines that hit you with exactly what a Louis C.K. joke, a very grim version of, we should all be grateful all the time to be in an airplane.
Yes.
That thing that you can go to some comedians for, where you have disassociated from the reality that you cannot. It is the David Foster Wallace, like, this is water, this is water, this is water thing, where suddenly you can see this reality that is a way, or in this case, horrific, that you have attempted to divorce yourself from all of the time, and you are forced to now see it again clearly. What he talks about then is like, when you read the brochures, when you go on the websites for the places, they understand exactly what situation you're in, which is that you have an old father who you don't want to see anymore, and they will take him if you give them money. And again, like, you cannot help but be overwhelmed by exactly the thing that he is trying to convey, which is how horrific that is, how our entire way of thinking about the end of life is completely nightmarish, how there is no dignity for anyone in any circumstance at this part of our life. There's a lot of physical comedy in this special that I find unnecessary and unimpressive.
Yeah.
The one good physical joke is in this section where he talks about how his dad spends his entire day like this, and then his entire night like this, and then his entire day like this, and it's like a street lamp. And it evokes so clearly this image of what this place is like, and how horrified he is by it, and how he does not know what to do with those feelings, and how we are also horrified by it, and we do not know what to do with our feelings.
And he's doing what a comedian can do, which is make us look at it, process your feelings, relieve the anxiety you have over the reality of life, that you have parents, they die, you get older, you die. And it is really evocatively written. Like, we'll get to the worst parts of the special later, but like, the writing of this special is like, clearly he's like, this section is clearly he's like, this is something. I'm going to write the hell of it. It feels tonally a lot like the TV show.
Yes.
Where it
is a lot like the TV show.
There are sections that are just sort of like sad and beautifully rendered. He describes going to a home, visiting the home, and seeing all the people, just sort of interactions. And he's like, it looks like a bumper car, just bumper cars that are turned off. And you're just like, what a just sort of beautiful portrait. And then it culminates in he's walking around the home and he sees sort of an old lady. And then he just goes, have you ever seen a dead baby bird on the street? And now he has grown into this tendency of doing these tangents, of like these absurd tangents.
Yes.
Instead, he does this like, I don't even know, it's like a sad tone poem about the idea of dead baby birds. And he just describes the fact of like, some birds are born, when they come out the shell, they're two at the end of the nest and they just fall. And he does the noise of it. And then you walk by, it's the saddest thing you've ever seen in your entire life, and just keep on walking by. I'm smiling now. It's so beautiful and sad, and the way he paints it is so funny. And it was like, I am missing this.
Yeah.
Like, I would love more comedians doing this. Obviously, I know not every part of every special has to be,
or should. This is
death, and specifically like painterly portraits of nature, and how like humans are just like birds or whatever. But it is what you see here is care and thought about how building it, using your talents to go further than I think an audience will, and like watching it, then like it is in such a sharp contrast to how much less work goes into the rest of the special.
Yes, and like there's even a joke about the wonder of nature earlier. There is a joke about how it's not even really a joke. I'm not sure why, like where it is supposed to be going. He talks about how he lives in New York City. He wishes he lived outside in nature, but he lives in New York City. There's no nature. There's no wildlife in New York City. He once saw a bee on 38th. It was a dead bee. And then the joke is somebody shot a bee, and you're like, okay. But it is like
it's all, you're like, where it's so meandering.
And what is the thing that I'm supposed to be taking away from it? And also, it's not true. Like, New York City is full of odd, strange. You opened with a joke about rats with AIDS.
Yes.
Like, it is.
To say nothing of then when he sets up nature,
yes,
he has really nothing to say.
Really,
it really goes to like, you ever go to nature? You're so far into nature, your phone only has one bar and it's a gay bar. Like, that is like a play on words.
Yes.
It is like kind of a nothing punchline, and that's the end of this section.
That's it.
So there's a lot of, I would say, the special's filled with kind of like filler observational humor. A useful example as we sort of transition to like what the special is, or sort of how there's this other layer, right? So he's talking about jury duty.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there's a long section about how jury duty, and how like, oh, it's weird that you make to do an oath. Like, really kind of like Seinfeldian, just sort of like, isn't that kind of odd that you do an oath like this? But why do you raise
why is your hand not like this?
And
nobody told you how to raise your hand.
I've never been on a jury duty. And if I was, like, all of it just sort of like, flights of fancy. But it's set up by being
one of.
This is
truly a moment. I was rewatching this on the train on the way here because the train was being very slow.
Yes.
And I got to this section and honestly paused it and just had to sit for a second and think, what is happening in his brain as he is saying this?
This is a good. I wrote down the line because I assume you'll hear the sentence and some people will be like, oh, and that's when he gets into it.
Yeah.
He does not get into it. And I'm not saying like, arguably he's done special. He doesn't need to now do a new section about what happened. But he's sort of like his relationship to the fact that audience members will associate him with certain things is odd. When he says a sentence, he goes, the truth is important, but lying is important too. And he talks about situations where you might lie. That's how he gets into jury duty. Which he doesn't even need to set up the truth thing until you're like, but we think of you as, like, are you reckoning with truth?
But the other part of that I was like, is the part where he's talking about the oath and how when you sit down, when you're in court, all you have to do is you sit down and you say, I'm telling the truth. And then everyone has to be like, ooh, they're telling the truth now. And even thinking about him coming up with that framing and what it might be doing in relation to how anyone is watching his material is so. It is like, this is what I was sort of saying at the beginning, the Funhouse mirror reaction. Because there is a part of me that's like, ha ha ha, it's so funny that he is joking about how this relationship with truth, and he clearly knows that there's going to be somebody who is watching who's like, isn't that the truth? And the other side of me is going, is he just saying this whole time, like, it's stupid that any of you ever believed me? Why, or have this relationship with truth-telling? I've just been standing up here the whole time being like, I'm telling the truth, wink.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in my opinion, I wish it was that amount of I think it's more like he thought of a transition and that the transition made sense. And he'd always do sort of these sort of hinge on truth and lies and whatever. The thing that it underlines, and this is the sort of, when we go back to the sort of meta aspect of like Louis C.K.'s truth teller, which is like, he doesn't tell stories in this special at all. He doesn't really tell stories in the last 4 specials. Like stories where it's like, it's all like clearly autobiographical, and then he can kind of do flights of fancy throughout. Instead, he does like fake stories that seem like the other day I was doing this. And then clearly it's all made up. Now, the thing about that is, one, it's an interesting style. Not a lot of comedians do it because it's hard. But like Adam Sandler does it a lot. Like if you watch his specials, it's tons of these.
Yes.
And the thing is, Adam Sandler's a really good actor. And so it's hard, and he has a certain sort of goodwill currently built up with the audience. So you kind of like fall into the trap and you're wooed by him. Louis C.K. always would do this, but it hinged on this other idea that he was a truthful person.
Yeah.
So when you take that out, it's hard to not have the special glaze over because you don't agree. All the premises seem fake because they are made up things. And it is one of the, it is the undercurrent that makes the special just sort of like feel blah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the bigger fact, but can you talk about, because I think this was like the rub that you had, that it's not like, because I think people will assume when they're looking at us in our glasses and being like,
what are you saying about our glasses?
You guys are just like mad that Louis C.K. gets to do stand-up again. You think he should be in, I don't know, a home for canceled men.
Mm-hmm. An island.
An island of canceled men. Well, now we're foreshadowing the end of the special. But, and maybe or maybe not. The main thing is, like, as people who watch a lot of stand-up, it is just that, like, formally, a lot of his act hinged on a certain sort of, like, goodwill on the idea of him as a person who, like, he's speaking the truth, that he played with, that without that, then it just seems like a guy kind of, like, saying random shit.
Yeah, but it is also... So you were talking about all these different versions of him as truth teller.
Yeah.
And in particular, that one of them is existential truth teller and one of them is shame monster. And that both of these exist, and in fact sometimes they're the same, right? Like, I am a shame monster, and the existential truth that I am telling you is that we all have this shame, and we are all, like, I am bearing a reality that none of us really want to touch. But so much of why those earlier specials work so well is that he could transition when he was doing these transitions in and out of the premises, in and out of these stories that he was telling about his life and his children. They were often also premises, or they were shifts in and out of, I'm being existential truth teller now. Now I'm being shame monster. Where did the switch flip? Were they always the same? And you can trust me as shame monster because actually I'm going to switch back to like big truth teller all the time. And so it felt like a careful and canny and ultimately trustworthy presentation of all of these incredibly dark things because you were confident that at every moment he was going to then say, but of course I don't do those things. And of course I am just exorcising all of these demons that I have. And we all have demons. And then when it turned out that it was not that he was just exorcising all of these demons, but that in fact he was doing all of these things all along, and it was always a lie all along. And so now I come to this and I spend the entire time in what feels like one of those boxes in a museum where they're like, this is what an earthquake feels like. And then you stand here like this and you just go like you can't, and it sort of, you don't know at any moment when his announcement that he is once again telling you the truth is going to wallop you over to the side and be like, which one was the lie and where was the truth? And how do I not just how do I intellectually process all of this, but like, how do I have any kind of emotional connection to this thing if you are just standing up on this stage constantly telling me that you truly, truly, truly feel so many thoughts about the pad underneath the chicken? I don't think that you do.
Yeah, it's a fundamental... Your disconnect is like at the fundamental idea of what stand-up comedy is with him.
Yes.
Which is the thing that like Louis would fetishize in his performance of self for a decade, which is like, I'm just a guy talking up here. Like beyond these sort of all other things, like Louis was like smart enough to know that I'm wearing a black t-shirt and black jeans. I'm just a guy. And I'm just saying things. I'm making them up on the spot. This is a fundamental lie of stand-up comedy. And what's exciting about American stand-up comedy is it's like we go in and it's conversational, but it's all planned. And that's the paradox.
The magic.
Yes. And then Now you're like, well, you're not just a guy. You're Louis C.K.
Dude.
And like you do all these things. And when you say these things, it feels like exercises, right? It just feels like studies of paintings. You're not really giving us much. Like like when he really goes for it, you can feel a person really going for it. But the rest is just like you're talented enough that it just feels like you're showing us how good you are at drawing these different things. And there's like a good example is like there's a section that is supposedly about living in the present that really just builds to that his worst fear is ball torture. Right?
Sure.
And then he just kind of goes on about ball torture.
Yeah.
And then this feels like, oh, in the past, this would feel like a joke about living in the present still. But instead, it feels like you kind of just wanted to talk about how how your balls are. He's talking about how he wants to remove his balls. So he's just like, they just sit there and stink and bother my dick. And it does feel not like he wanted to tell us about living in the present.
Yeah.
It felt like he wanted to get away with saying how his balls stink.
Yeah.
And that is that flips the essentially fundamental nature of how the comedy works, where essentially like you are making the punchline the premise and it's at the end.
Yeah.
So then you're just like,
yeah.
oh, this whole time that was this.
Well, the other
over and over again.
The other this whole time that was this thing, which you touched on in the beginning, which is if the thing that you are trying to do is be vulnerable over and over again, and I believe that you are doing a hard thing, bearing a deep inner thing about yourself, and that this is a gift that you are giving me, that is very different than if I discover that actually this is exhibitionism and you are getting off on it.
Yes.
And the act that he was canceled for is to literally get off in front of other people. And so how can you not be at every moment in this special? How can I not, every time he says, here's a gross thing about myself, how can I not be thinking, you like other people to see you being gross?
Yes. I mean, there's so much he is not talking about in the special. And this is the thing with famous comedians in general. It is difficult for famous comedians because they don't kind of like want to talk about being famous and how weird their life is and how much money they have. And just sort of like, they don't want to reckon with the perception society has with it. And by sort of humanizing that perception, we make it look as human generally. Like, it's why what Richard Pryor did was like the greatest comedy ever did. So we know a lot is going on with Louis C.K.
Yeah.
He's one of the first people ever to experience this phenomenon of one, he was this sort of famous person. He was considered the greatest comedian alive. All this stuff comes out with him. We learn that from his appearance on the Theo Von podcast, that he like went through sex therapy and like rethought about his entire relationship to everything. None of that is in this at all. Maybe, and look, to give him the most benefit of the doubt, he's like, let me do one special where I'm just sort of like, we pretend nothing happened, see if that works, then I'll get into it. I don't think that's going to happen because what comedian on earth would do that? I think most comedians are like, oh, this worked, so I'll just keep on trying to do the thing to work, and maybe I'll run out the clock, which is kind of what this feels like. It feels like
100%.
Maybe I could run out the clock and like, but make a little bit more money than I was making these last 10 years and not work as hard doing all the self-release stuff. This is I want to get into sort of the big problem with the special.
Believe it or not, none of this
is like,
problem.
I will say, like, honestly, what we're talking about makes the special kind of okay with one really good part. So then when you compare that to other specials, I would be like kind of recommending it to people. Because like not that many specials have
there's
great
one good part.
Like there's a saying about movies are essentially like great movies are just like 4 good scenes surrounded by no bad scenes. So that you can kind of be like, oh, there's one great part and it's kind of a bunch of okay things. That's better than a lot of specials. But there actually is a bigger problem. Which is
there's a couple.
There are 3 jokes that hinge on AIDS, and there are 7 jokes that are exclusively about molestation or pivot to molestation. Now, so this focus on the molestation part.
Well, child molestation.
Child molestation. Sorry. I think a comedian has the right to talk about it. I actually think there's a sort of societal value to doing a joke in your special about child molestation and reckoning with this sort of dark reality of the thing and relieving attention, all that stuff. I think there's a value of it. When you do it 7 times, none of it becomes so boring. There's jokes. He talks about AIDS 3 times so that like a joke later in the special that would have benefited if it's the only mention of AIDS kind of feels like you already talked about AIDS. So this is the feeling that I have that watching the special, and this is what I was thinking about, that cancel culture was the best thing that ever happened to comedy. And specifically, the best thing that happened for a certain subsect of sort of edgy, transgressive comedians. Because like 15 years ago, there was like a conundrum for these comedians, which is the internet allowed there to be a place where you can say whatever you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not in the biggest place, but you can find places where you can say whatever you want at any time.
Yeah.
So kind of you didn't need a comedian to say bad words. Then 10 years ago, cancel culture, whatever it was, emerges as a thing for comedians to point to and be like, what I'm doing actually on stage is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I'm cool. I'm an outsider for doing it. And what it does is they would evoke the specter of cancel culture at the beginning of their special and allows them to sort of like bring comedic tension and energy to what otherwise would be kind of lazy joke writing, where you're like, don't have a punchline, you can say a slur, and then the audience will still make a noise anyway. But now, and this is a good example of it, they are on Netflix. They are doing brand deals. They're doing Super Bowl commercials. So they are not cool outsiders anymore. Also, like, people are saying the R word everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you watch parts of this special, and you watch all of Tony Hinchcliffe's special, and it just, like, does not really have comedic tension or energy, and it is just so boring.
Yeah.
And the feeling of watching Louis C.K., who is a talented person, do it is he seems boring. He seems bored. He seems tired. And it makes it just sort of like a not particularly fun thing to watch. And definitely he is better than this. And he has been better than this. And I don't think people will be like, oh, this is just kind of Louis I knew. He's like, this is a tired man trying to figure out like how to kind of get through an hour.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of can't believe I have to say this part of it also, but like when you do that many jokes about child molestation and you have in the past then been discovered to have done the things that you regularly joked about, like the most tension in the joke is, wait, is he actually so much worse than we thought he was?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that then because the bad things he talked about.
He confessed to the things that he did constantly.
Even if you go like the previous specials did much more race stuff.
Yes.
And then you go like, you're talking about how you're not racist, but then you're doing this racist thing. In many ways, it's the same thing. You're talking how you're not a pedophile and you've not been molested. But you're like, and that you don't want to pee on kids. There's just sort of a lot. It's not like a theme that runs out. It is a sort of like a drum beat and a thing he kind of goes to, partly because it is a safer, edgy thing for him to go to, right? It's like he's not really he's not like throwing out. If you watch the previous 3 specials, he says the word Jews a lot as a shock punchline, right? Mm-hmm. Or he'll like do a move he does is he'll say people in stories are black. This is a classic Louis C.K. move. He goes, there's a black lady. You can see a place here where he'd do it, where he'd be like, I went to the reception desk, she was black, and then the audience would be like, and then you go, look, that's not part, it's just who she was. And then the punchline would be him doing a black voice.
Yeah.
None of that's there.
Yeah.
It's just always talking about molestation and pedophile, and it is like, there just is something so not cool about trying to figure out what is the safest, edgy topic to talk about.
Yes, and I mean, it's also, I think about Anthony Jeselnik, who often does child molestation jokes or pedophilia jokes and are very carefully, very, very carefully designed to perpetually find some way of undermining them so that you are once again surprised by how horrified you are. And there is like a moral responsibility if you're going to be a comedian doing child molestation jokes to find a way to surprise me with horror. And instead I am getting more and more bored by molestation
Yes. Yeah, I mean, like, to say nothing of the fact that there are probably people in the audience who have been molested when they were children, and you're not doing anything to make it so they're having a better experience.
Yeah.
But it's also just like, when Anthony does it, it usually would be a section about it.
Yes.
So then it's actually a
Yes.
challenge, right? Can
Yes.
I get you to laugh at the thing you were kind of already know the area?
Yeah.
Where, like, I wrote down all the jokes and I highlighted the parts and it truly was like every fifth joke hinged on it. So, like, the closer in of itself is actually, I think, a good idea for a joke, which is essentially about the idea of barely legal, and like what's essentially saying is, if you read this, you are not a pedophile, but you're so fucking close, but you're not. That is definitely a classic Louis joke. It definitely hinges on the sort of shame stuff that he is fluent in.
Yeah.
And if that was the only mention of any of this stuff, one, it would hit tons harder, and he would kind of be like able to take the sort of like I'm above it tone.
Yeah.
But truly, it is just like every 5 jokes, it comes up in some way or the other, and he does not seem above it. The sort of the excitement of the topic runs out, and you're just sort of like, so we're closing on this again? And that shouldn't be the case. Like, it's just like, that's when I say, like, the care put into the home stuff is so clear. The jokes, the punchlines are surprising, and you don't know where it's coming, and like, there's different angles of it, and it's like really written. And then there's just like a bunch of jokes where it's like yada yada yada, have sex with a kid, yada yada yada, like I was molested or I had sex or whatever, or like
my dad didn't molest me, but he could have, but he's old now.
Yeah, there's a callback that should be amazing in some ways, because you're like, oh, I didn't even think it's going there. You're like, yeah, of course he's going to bring it up again, because he just needed something to say there to get out of a joke. And that's what it feels like. Is like, these feel like exercises. And for a person, it's like, I'm sure people are like, well, why don't you just like sit back and laugh? It's like, one, I was trying to. There's a part that I laughed a lot. I liked it. I talked about how great it was. I will talk about how great it was probably for a while. But also, like, if he was supposedly the greatest comedian alive, he, I believe, assumed she should be held to such a standard. So as a result, we are doing so, and currently he is not operating as such.
No, I mean, he is not operating as such, but also seems uninterested in trying to engage with the things that you would want anyone in his position to be sincerely engaging with. There is a whole world that has happened in the last decade since a mainstream audience might have heard of him. There are plenty of other disgusting things happening. People still ride airplanes, in fact. And it is not just that he is not engaging with his own, what has happened in his own life and being vulnerable about those feelings, but that he seems completely uninterested in the world that he used to be actually quite like a really meaningful voice on what it was like to be a person in the world. There's almost nothing about what it is like to be a person in the world. The closest it gets is age. And he does talk in multiple jokes about his own aging and his father's aging. And he, the beginning of the special is like, isn't it so terrible that we have to wake up over and over and open our eyes and be like, here I am still alive, I have to do this. And then he says, but not too much longer, just a couple more. And yes, like, there is something about that feels like a comedian reckoning with one of the great, horrible, fascinating things about being a person. But it for sure doesn't also help the sense of, like, I'm a tired person who doesn't want to be here.
What do you think about it? I believe it builds to what would be his sort of like truth teller moment. He definitely a comedian as philosopher moment, which is he's talking about his friends have a baby in their 40s and they're complaining about how hard it is. He famously became famous because he complained about how hard it is, but whatever. They're complaining at it. But he's trying to say, he's like, you're going to miss this part. And okay. And then, which is, I think, true. A correct statement about, I think most people who have experienced this would agree with. But that is getting to his grand statement, which is, life teaches you how you should have lived it.
Mm-hmm.
That truly feels like he's hoping, he's hoping to be on bumper stickers. And like, that is him being, there's no punchline. It is true. Like at that moment, he's just being like, look how I've lived through it. And look how wise I am now.
Mm-hmm.
I have had experiences. We're not going to talk about those experiences. You know them. But life teaches you how you should have lived it.
Mm-hmm.
How did that moment hit for you?
Well, it's pretty bad because, for one, he's not telling me any of the things that he's realized about what he should have done.
Yes.
So how am I supposed to, like, I need you to do a little, like, applied work here about what that actually means for you.
Yeah.
It is it has the shape of something meaningful, but the point of it is to then feel it having friction and tension and utility and beauty when it is actually in somebody's life, and there's no life here. The thing that comes right after that is a Buddhist parable about about a couple who have a child, and the child grows up and bad things happen, and the Buddhist monk says, or the Buddha says, they say, we are so unlucky. And they say, well, we'll see. Then a good thing happens. We are so lucky. Well, we'll see. Then a bad thing happens. We are so unlucky. This is also literally the end of Bluey, which I do have to say. And
to plug your book out later this year.
Spring 2027. The Bluey years. But that when you, Bluey's a very deep children's show, so of course they make quite a lot of use of that Buddhist parable, but it is also so annoying to see a full-grown man saying things like life teaches you how you should have lived it, and then transitioning into a Buddhist parable, and then the end of the Buddhist parable is like, huh.
Yeah, it's a good example. The next joke after that is about dating when he's older, because I only date women my own age, and he sets it up. And it is literally almost verbatim a joke from his last special where he says, I only date women who are younger. And he has jokes about that. Also, I should plug my book, Comedy Book, which came out already. And I do talk about Louis C.K. and this sort of idea about it. What should we make of the fact that this came out at all? Right now, the special is out there. I will set up the fact that he's put out 3 specials. They were all on his self-release on his website. I believe I think it was right. I guess it was 2021 or so. I asked the person who buys specials for Netflix if they're going to work with Louis C.K. And he said, we have no plans in working with Louis C.K., which I don't think he is lying. That is how you should answer that question when you work for a company, which is, we have no plans. They put out this special now in the year 2026. That
is correct.
In the year 2026. What should we make of that?
It is kind of shocking how little I make of it. How unsurprising it is, how inevitable it feels, how... I saw it pop up in my preview row, which is how critics often get screeners, before I read the announcement. And I saw it and I was just like, oh yeah. Yeah. There were so many other places along the road where it could have been like, nope, we've decided that's where the line was, that did not happen.
Yeah.
That this then feels... it feels simply inevitable. Now, I am very curious what the response will look like.
Yes, we are recording this the day before it comes out.
I am very curious whether there will be any hullabaloo about it at all. Or I imagine there will get some press and some attention being both on the look here, it's so gross that he's back, how dare they have bought this, and on the finally, we acknowledge that the only way out of cancel culture is through, and all those things. But it also, I kind of expect it to happen and to go away.
I mean, like everything does. I mean, like you'll have the amount of days. We'll see what it's just sort of like the news cycle will only be able to stomach how much it is, right? It's like, like people talked about the Kevin Hart roast longer than you expect because there wasn't really anything else to talk about. But if this came out the day after the Kevin Hart roast, no one would talk about the Kevin Hart roast for another day. I mean, it's like.
And vice versa. If this had come out the day before the Kevin Hart
I mean,
roast.
like the main thing is like this will be like there'll be people talking about like cancel culture is dead, and I'll be like, you're gonna miss it while it's gone. Like your entire thing was built upon it, and without it, you kind of don't really have a reason to exist because again, like if people really wanted to hear people say bad words, like it's actually kind of easier than watching a stand-up comedian do it.
Yeah.
And then now you're just like reducing the role of a stand-up comedian. I mean, I remember I was having a conversation. I want to say 2 years ago with a comedian, not of this world, but like about how I felt Louis was going to come back. And it just sort of was like, he's on all these podcasts already. So he's sort of back. He just sort of is a fact. He just is back.
Yes.
And I do think part of the undercurrent is, he's better than all these other comedians at comedy. So like, well, why don't we just like if these comedians are going to exist doing this stuff, shouldn't we have the one that's like good at it? And that kind of like is louder than like there's his like what is sort of interesting about the Louis C.K. narrative is like I do think to the world of podcasts in which he stayed on, a lot of the reason of like what happened to him was that performance that was leaked in Long Island where he like makes the school shooting jokes. Yeah. Like that became the like I remember he would do interviews like it's when that happened to him, I was like, how dare they do? Like that was the worst thing that's ever happened. Like that happened. Yeah, and people say bad things, and now we're fine with people saying bad things. Like actually, the sort of Me Too aspect of it is like fully in the rear view, and I do think like other than the Theo Von mentioned, like he'll probably be done talking about it forever, unless I'm sure there are journalists at comparable publications to our own, and maybe even our own, I don't know, probably not, who are like, kind of be an interesting time to finally interview Louis C.K. about this stuff.
Yeah.
And I bet part of it will be rooted in like, well, he's good at stand-up. There's only so many people are good at stand-up. Like there is this sort of like full cynicism of the modern times where like modern times or modernity where it's like, this is like the compromise of like what capitalism broadly, where you're like, well, if everything's going to be awful, at least I should get cheap gas prices and cheap groceries. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what this feels like. This feels like, well, like people are going to be exploited no matter what. So like shrimp should be cheap. That's what this feels like.
You just also cannot remove the larger context of where we are as a country. Culturally.
You can't.
I can't.
And I can't. But people don't even think about.
No, but from the sort of like press perspective of why those things would happen. It's like, well, of course, how am I going to draw a line for Louis C.K. when our president is this person or whatever? Like we are in this world of, all of the Overton windows, all of the people who love to talk about Overton windows have all gone together into a room and announced that, like, this is where we are now. So, of course, it would be wild to not, because we're also doing profiles of Nazi, all of it's kind of together in a big, terrifying, like, rain stick of noise. And so I think that is also what I feel about this special coming out at this particular moment. Although it is interesting that it is doing so, in this part of the Trump phase where it also feels like maybe people are thinking, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it just feels like this comes out and it's like, in so much as that there were sides in a comedy civil war.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you won. Like, enjoy being the people that win.
Mm-hmm.
People don't like that. Like, people don't like whatever is the dominant form of comedy because they want comedy to seem like somewhat outside the mainstream.
Well, it's harder.
Yeah. So then it's just sort of like, okay, enjoy not being edgy at all. It's probably not fun. And I think like it will be the beginning of this sort of like dwindling of their audiences. Just because it won't be the sort of like, I mean, not avant-garde, but like not the sort of like
cool
alt thing. Yeah. Like it truly is like
brave.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, you're the most famous comedians playing the biggest venues, getting the most money to do it, and like everyone else is on YouTube now. which was the sort of space that you were sadly relegated to, it just is going to like, it really, it's a state that really lays bare the reality of your art.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not think that is the sort of judgment that a lot of these comedians, Louis C.K. included, probably want to deal with.
Not based on this special.
Do you have any final thoughts? Lingering thoughts about this thing?
I watched it once and was really surprised at how much my mind was wandering, particularly in the second half. And I watched it again, and I was like, now I will pay attention and write down and figure out all of the things that I want to say. And once again, by about 35 minutes in, I was like, what are we talking about again?
You know what? This is news you can use. You could just stop the special in the middle. You could, if you watch the first 20, you kind of get a sense of it, and I mean, if your goal is to like enjoy yourself, you can watch first 20, but like kind of glad to have this back, and then you don't have to reckon with like it kind of over and over again. But like specifically, so like there's sort of like tone setting stuff that is, some parts are better than the other. Builds to the sort of dad home stuff that's really good. He has like one joke about getting work done that's okay, and then he says, "I was talking to an 11-year-old." Turn it off right then.
Right then.
And then you'd be like, well, that was a nice 20 minutes, kind of like a Comedy Central half hour.
Yep. That's it.
Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure to be here.